thank you for coming tonight. Connie is here to talk about the ghost stories of the West Side of Batavia. This is the stories of our ghost walks, but without the walking. So that's the appeal of this. But if you do want to do the walk, they are coming up every Friday this month. So we have 2 on the west side, and brand new this year are 2 on downtown. And Connie will also be doing the stories of downtown here at the museum on Thursday, October 17th. So if you want to come and check that out, please do.
Yeah, because I took this walk
Okay, yep,
years ago.
yep, so.
It's grueling.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
I said, now that I've gotten older.
But I will let Connie get to the spooky stories
Okay.
and the ghosts and the murders and the
All
bodies
that good
and all
stuff.
that good
Yeah,
stuff.
all the
so.
good
We like the word.
All Halloween stuff. Yeah, so welcome to West Side Ghost Stories, but not just ghost stories. I'm going to tell you about hangings and murders and grave robbing, all the good stuff for October. I'm going to start though with what is supposedly the most haunted building in Batavia, and that is the Engine House. Now, this building is not the original building on the site. The first building was built in 1800. It was a mill, probably a wood structure. And it stood on the site for 84 years until it was destroyed by fire. So this building was built in 1885, built as a municipal building for sewer collection, waterworks. And in 1906, an addition was put on it so village meetings could be held there. And they were right up till 1915. When Batavia became a city. Now, 1915 also marked the year of a tragedy in this building, a tragedy that occurred that possibly created one of the spirits said to still reside there. It was caretaker John Coleman's job to check on the operation of the pumps in the building, and he had to do that several times each day, and he did it by descending a set of steps in a well. On John Coleman's last day of life, it's believed that he descended the steps as he always did, but they think his lantern blew out. And when he struck a match to relight the lantern, the flame met with the accumulated natural gas and an explosion occurred. So severe it destroyed a part of the building, but miraculously John survived. However, his injuries were so extreme he died within a few hours. So, thought is that he could be one of the spirits still in the building. Could there be firefighters still there? Well, it served as an engine house from 1948 to 1978, and 2, possibly 3 firefighters died in the building. So, could be firefighters. I'm told if you're in that smoke-free building and you smell smoke, there's a fireman following you, and he's not alive. But the spirit most often seen in the engine house is affiliated with the first building, with the mill. And this person has been seen by county employees and also by restaurant employees. As Batavians, you know, served as a restaurant at one time. This man is described always as breathtakingly handsome. He's tall, he has dark hair, he's usually wearing a flowing white shirt, dark trousers, and boots. So he is the one most often seen. But spirits are heard in the building. Imagine being a county employee and working there alone and hearing footsteps on empty staircases, hearing doors open and close on their own, supposedly. I don't know how much access really there is to as a county building. I would assume open to the public, so try to finagle your way in sometime and see if you get to meet any of the spirits. We're going to head on to Ellicott Avenue, in particular 5 Ellicott Avenue, and talk about one of the most powerful spiritualists in Batavia. That was Reverend Mary Ward Gifford, who made her home at 5 Ellicott Avenue. Not a Batavia native, came here in 1912 to actually visit her sister. But she soon took up residence at 5 Ellicott Avenue, which still stands today. You can peek. I don't know the owner, so don't go knocking on the door. But you can go by right across from Dunkin' Donuts. And she gathered together, when she moved there, started to gather together people to start a spiritualist congregation. Now, spiritualism was very popular here, very mainstream here, from the 1800s into the mid-1900s. And spiritualists believe that the dead can communicate with the living, and And they do that through a living person sensitive to their messages, usually called a medium. And just such a medium was Reverend Mary Ward Gifford. Now she was so popular as a leader that by 1913, just a year later, her congregation was so big they couldn't meet in her parlor anymore, so they rented space downtown. But maybe a large congregation wasn't meant to be for Reverend Gifford, because soon an argument broke out in the congregation. There was a faction that wanted to start a choir. According to Reverend Gifford, they simply murdered music. And so those that agreed with Reverend Gifford went back to Ellicott Avenue and formed their own spiritualist group. And the tone-deaf people stayed at the hall that they rented, and they also became the Tilly Reynolds Spiritualist Society. So you had a split, but you still had two spiritualist gatherings. Now, because Reverend Gifford was very respected in the spiritualist community, she would have many guest speakers come to hold seances and to do readings. And many of them came from a place called Lilydale. Now, you're both familiar with Lilydale. You may have been there?
I am.
Okay. It's a spiritualist community still in existence today near Fredonia, New York. She held seances, circles, was active in the spiritualist community for 20 years and did her services out of her home for 20 years, right up until 1934, when she died at the age of 87. Her services were held at her home, so she was laid out in her home. She's buried in Corfu, New York. And spiritualism continued to really flourish here in Batavia right up until about 1950 or 55. In the 50s, it really started to wane. And after a while, you saw really no information about spiritualism in Batavia. Now, people have been on a walk, and you've been on a walk. Tell me that if they take photographs of this home at night, they see circles of light, they see orbs. And for believers, people that believe in the spirit world will tell you those are spirits that are hovering around that house. And I have to think if that is the case, it's because so many were called to that home for so many years. So perhaps they're just waiting for that perfect person. No, maybe. Maybe a nighttime trip down Ellicott.
I know.
Okay. I'm going to take you next to Mick's place. This house, I saw they're working on the porch today. I'm so happy. There's new ownership. I'm not sure how many years he's at the house now, but starting to do some repair. It had really sat empty. It was starting to kind of fall into ruin, and I just love seeing that he's bringing it back. That's very exciting. Now, I have to readily admit, I couldn't afford this house. I was so jealous when it went up for sale and I couldn't buy it. But why I love it is because I'm a gardener. So I look at this big front yard, the side yard, the backyard, and I swear if I moved into that house, I would have a rose garden, I'd have an herb garden. I've talked to other people that said, oh, I put an in-ground pool, there's so much property. One thing I never heard anybody say is, let's put in a cemetery. And yet that may be what the owner already has here. Because back in 1966, the owner of the house at that time, a local attorney, filed all the necessary paperwork to have his land, this yard, declared as private burial ground. Now, some things you want to know about the attorney. He was up on forgery and grand larceny charges. He owed a lot of people a lot of money. The banks were trying to force him to do involuntary bankruptcy. And if your land is declared as private burial ground, you're suddenly exempt from money payments, right? Now, I know you are both intelligent people that are going to go home and start looking into the law for the property. Before you do that, check with the health department, check with zoning. I don't know how they feel about this anymore. So, was he just trying to scam people? Was he just trying to safeguard his property from his creditors? Could be, but another piece of the law says in order to even file the paperwork, you have to have substantial documentation that there are already bodies buried in the ground. So if anyone knows the new owner, I'd suggest perennials with shallow roots and no swimming pool under any conditions. Don't start digging in that yard. I'm going to take you next down Ellicott Avenue, and I'm going to take you to the house that sits on the corner of Washington and Ellicott. kind of a pinky purple, very pretty house. That at one time was the Benham house. I'd like to tell you about the Benhams. But I need you to imagine it's not October, it's not 2024. We're going back to 1897. We're going to January. It's cold. It's the wee hours of the morning. It's dark on the street. No sounds, almost pitch black. The only sound you might hear is a creaking of ice-covered branches. And then suddenly you'd see the Benham's front door fly open, Howard Benham run down Washington Avenue, disappear into the dark. Just a few minutes later, he'd come running back toward the house with another man, a man with a black medical bag. But as they reach the front door, it flies open again, and an elderly woman screams, "She's dead! She's dead! I know she's dead." And indeed, when Howard and the doctor enter the house, they find Howard's wife, Florence, dead of a heart condition. The doctor can do nothing but attempt to console the family, Florence's mother, her husband, her young child. Florence is laid to her eternal rest, or so we think. Should be the end of my story, but it's not. For soon rumors began to fly about Batavia. First one was about Howard. Howard was a local banker. He was very handsome, according to everybody, and he was also quite a philanderer. He liked the ladies. Right? Now, as handsome as Howard was, Florence was said to be as unattractive as he is handsome. But she had sizable assets. She had an inheritance. What did you think I was going to say? And so everyone said Howard killed her for her money, for the inheritance. The other rumor was not about Howard at all. The rumor was about the doctor. And that rumor said Florence didn't die of a heart condition. She died of an illegal botched operation performed by the doctor. Well, the doctor heard the rumor and he just discarded it. He said, I attended her, I went to the house, I did house calls, her health was failing, I did everything I could, and I'm ignoring it. But this doctor's wife was absolutely livid. And she went to the district attorney and she demanded that Florence Benham's body be exhumed and an autopsy be performed. Now, I don't know who she knew or how persuasive she was, but she had to be, for indeed the district attorney ordered Florence Benham's body dug up and an autopsy was performed. And guess what she died of? A heart condition. Or at least we think at that time. And so Florence is reburied. Should have been laid to her eternal rest. But no. Now a young pharmacy clerk named Sam Elliott comes forward. He comes forward to talk to the DA when he heard that Florence had died. He wrestled with his conscience and finally said, I have to talk to the DA. And it was about an interaction he had had with Howard Benham at the pharmacy just days before Florence's death. It seems Howard had come into the pharmacy to buy some prussic acid or cyanide, and he told Sam it was to kill a dog. Now, what was curious wasn't that he was buying this. It was okay, you could go buy poison at the pharmacy. But what concerned Sam is he didn't want to sign the poison register, so there would be no evidence of him purchasing this poison. What disturbed Sam even more is what he related next to the DA, that Howard Benham was quite taken with a newspaper article. He told Sam all about it. It was about a Canadian man who successfully murdered his wife using prussic acid. Well, now the DA has again ordered Florence Benham's body exhumed. Second autopsy, but this time they're looking for prussic acid. And they do find enough in her internal organs to kill 7 men. Howard is promptly arrested, charged with his wife's murder, stands trial very quickly. A Batavia jury finds him guilty and sentenced him to be electrocuted. And he's sent to Auburn Prison, state prison, to await his fate. Now, Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that he wrote a book and his mother helped sell it. And that helped finance his appeal. And he indeed was granted a new trial in 1899 to commence in 1900. Now, the trial was not held in Batavia. The second trial was held in Canandaigua. And their sympathies ran very high for Howard. He was a handsome man when he went into jail. In a short period of time in prison, didn't seem to diminish his good looks. for he had many female admirers, and I'm told he was showered with gifts during the second trial. Now, as quickly as a Batavia jury found him guilty, a Canandaigua jury found him innocent, and he was a free man. But fortunately, I'm opinionated on this, fortunately, his freedom was very short-lived, for he died in 1901 of typhoid fever. And I don't feel bad about that at all. I'm going to take you up the hill on Ellicott and the Rowell Mansion. Now, the Rowell Mansion that sits on the corner of Richmond and Ellicott is not Rowell's first home. This home, I believe, was built, the large mansion was built around 1914 by Rowell and his second wife. So let me tell you about his life with his first wife. We're going to go back to 1883, and we're actually going to go to Bank Street. Rowell had purchased a beautiful American Gothic home on Bank. He lived there with his wife Jenny and his children. And by all accounts, Jenny was very beautiful woman. He had a paper box business on Main Street that was growing and thriving. So, brand new house, lovely wife and children, a thriving business, happy man, right? No, not at all. He was a tortured man. He was a suspicious man. He was worried because now that the business was doing so well, he had to be on the road more and more. He had to travel for his business. And he was fearful that his wife had resumed having an affair with a Utica attorney by the name of Johnston Livingston Lynch. In fact, Rowell confided in friends at the time that one of the main reasons he had moved from Utica was to get Jenny away from Lynch. And so now here a window with his travel, it had opened again, and he was fearful that the affair had taken up again. So he couldn't live with suspicion and doubt. He had to know. So he hatched a plan. October 28th, 1883, Sunday night, he sits down with the family and he announces to his wife that Monday morning he's leaving on a business trip and he'll be gone a few weeks. So Monday morning rolls around, Rowell packs up his belongings and he heads to the train station, but rather than taking a train, he books a hotel room, and he begins to lie in wait and watch to see if Lynch comes to Batavia. And he doesn't wait long. Indeed, Jenny had gotten word to Lynch that her husband would be away, and on Tuesday night, Rowell sees Lynch exiting the train. He packs up all his belongings, Rowell runs home, sneaks into his own home, and goes and hides in an adjacent bedroom to the master bedroom. Now later he told authorities this was his plan. He was going to wait in the adjacent bedroom until he heard the creak of bed springs. He was going to rush into the room, turn on the light using a pull chain. He would then reach in one pocket, pull out black pepper, throw it in Lynch's face, temporarily blinding him. Reach in another pocket, pull out a slingshot, and drive Lynch into the street where he could be publicly humiliated by the neighbors. So that's the plan. So Rowell's in the bedroom, he finally hears the creak of bed springs, and he rushes into the bedroom, and he reaches for the light, and he misses it. Oh, he's in the dark. But he reaches for that pepper, and he throws it, and he misses Lynch. So he reaches in the other pocket, but rather than a slingshot, he has brought a loaded revolver with him, and he fires off a shot. He misses Lynch, but Lynch knows something's wrong now. And he jumps out of bed and starts throwing on his clothing, and Rowell fires another shot and misses Lynch. Lynch now pushes past Rowell, heading for the door. He reaches the bedroom door, Rowell fires a third shot and hits the door jamb. Lynch must think he's free now. He's in the hall, he's running for the staircase. He reaches the top of the stairs, and Rowell fires another shot and hits him in the back. Lynch goes tumbling down the stairs and lands dead in the entryway. Now Jenny has been witness to this, and she's basically screaming, "You'll hang for this." And Rowell, cool, collected, walks down the hall, down the stairs, steps over Lynch's body, and heads out into the street. Now the neighbors have heard all this gunfire, and they come running, and they say, "Was it a burglar?" And Rowell says, "No. He seduced my wife. I caught him in the very act." And then he says, "I've warned her so many times." Well, authorities are called to take Rowell away, and he does ask Jenny for a good kiss, and she says, "No." Now, Jenny doesn't stay in Batavia. She follows Lynch's body back to Utica. And I believe she came back to Batavia maybe one other time. Raul does stand trial for murder, and he is acquitted. Now, whether at that time they felt that was justifiable, or as an employer, were there going to be a lot of lost jobs, whatever the rationale, he ended up being a free man, free to remarry and build that beautiful house that you see on Ellicott and Richmond. So, the man who got away with murder, I would say. One thing I find absolutely fascinating as I read about Batavia and ghosts and spiritualism is that the paper many times would report these stories very much as factual. They didn't, say take it with a grain of salt. They said, yeah, this happened. And one such story was about a mysterious ringing bell on Richmond Avenue. Same year as Raul, 1883, there was a report in the paper about a bell, a front door bell, that started ringing at a home. It was a large brick house originally home to a physician, but by 1883 it had been divided up, so it was a multi-family dwelling. And the front doorbell would ring, and the tenants would go running for the door, and they'd get there, and no one would be there. And this happened over and over again until it really distressed them. Now, the type of bell I'm talking about, my neighbor actually has one. It's a metal handle at the front door, there's a wire attached. And usually the wire runs all the way to the kitchen, and a bell is attached to the other end of the wire, usually set up in the corner near the ceiling. Now, this bell would ring so violently, it put dents in the wall. And again, though, every time they got to the door, it would stop and no one was there. Well, now they were so unnerved, they called a veteran bell hanger. Now, I want to know, I certainly haven't seen that in the college catalog as an offering as a career. I don't know when that went out of fashion. But back then, there was a veteran bell hanger by the name of Mr. Valentine. And so he was really, this was his expertise. And they called in Mr. Valentine, he checked the bell, he looked it all over, it was perfectly fine, but just for good measure, he replaced, I believe, the wire. And then the bell continued to ring. Well, now the residents called in men of a scientific nature, and they examined the bell, and they could find no earthly reason for the ringing, and so they determined it was due to supernatural powers. Now, we're not quite sure where the house stands, so I encourage you to some night, just go down Richmond, be very quiet. No, don't do that, that's silly. Don't do that. Let's go on to Oak Street and talk about the Oak Street Spectre. This is also something carried in the local paper about this. And it deals with Oak Street once you pass the corner on Richmond heading north, so heading toward Elba, going out of town. And if you ever travel there, I live in that area, and I can tell you, there's truck traffic, it's loud. You pass that corner, there's houses, there's businesses, there's a throughway. I mean, it's just, it's loud and it's busy. It's loud and it's busy. But if you lived in Batavia in 1905, the minute you passed that corner, it got desolate. A stagnant stream on one side, trees, fir trees on the other. And if you happened to be riding in the horse-drawn wagon one June in 1905 around midnight with Martin Rupp and Joseph Greentanner, that's how it would have appeared to you when you passed that corner. That evening, as they passed that corner heading north on Oak Street, what should suddenly happen but a large creature comes up out of the stream and heads straight for the wagon. Now, Joseph was a quick thinker. He grabbed his whip and jumped down and slashed at the creature till it disappeared. Now, they were not the only ones to see this creature. Soon a number of people on Oak Street began to see it, and so the paper called it the Oak Street Spectre. Now, it actually appeared to Martin's mother a few times. Once, she said, it appeared in the yard, she had to sick the dogs on it, chased it under the wagon. And it took many forms. Mrs. Rupp said once it appeared as a headless woman dressed in priestly robes. And she said it danced about the heads of her horses till they were almost mad. Other people said it appeared to them as a small cat. But when pelted with stones, it would rise up and turn into this bull. It had twisted horns and red eyes and smoke pouring from its nostrils. Now, a couple lessons that I think are so important from this story. One, never pelt a cat with stones, right? And second, If offered a horse-drawn wagon ride down Oak Street around midnight, politely decline for your own safety.
We'll get the party bus.
Don't go down Oak Street. Another newspaper story and another warning to residents, particularly residents on Lion Street. The paper did the article in April of 1881, and primarily it focused on a gentleman that lived on Lion Street named Black Dean. See, Black Dean worked on Main Street, so every evening he had to walk home from Main and come down Lion heading north. And on one particular evening, he saw a woman approaching him from the other direction. Now, Mr. Dean was a very polite man, so he tipped his hat and said, "Good evening, ma'am." And when she didn't answer, he looked a little closer and suddenly she disappeared. Now, not only was he polite, he was scared to death. And the paper reporter ran all the way home, jumped into bed, and didn't leave her for days. He was petrified. Soon other residents began to see this woman, and so she was dubbed the Woman in Black. And you guess why? Dressed head to toe in black, including a long black veil over her face. Some other characteristics of people that saw her said she was incredibly tall, some say almost 7 feet in height. And others said that she stood so rigidly, as tall and as erect as a tallow candle. Now, the paper at the time issued a warning to all Lion Street residents or anyone who was going to walk down Lion Street. And they said, "Beware the woman in black, lest she scare the wits out of you." So are you heading to Lion Street tonight?
No, my brother lives on Lion Street.
Oh, then beware. Maybe just visit him in the daytime. You might be safe. I think it's time to talk about grave robbing. Because it did happen here. And more than one incident. But let me tell you about this one. If you lived in Batavia in February 1862, you might read this obituary. Mary Elizabeth Buchanan, only child of Asher and Rhoda Buchanan, full of intelligence and hope, stricken with consumption, and dies at the tender age of 21. Yeah, grief-stricken parents buried their child in February 1862. But when they went back to pay respects at her grave, what should they find? That the grave has been dug up. Mary Elizabeth's body is gone. And they said the only thing that remained were pieces of her clothing that looked like it had been torn from her body by a sacrilegious hand. Well, a committee was formed. Batavians were irate. They were enraged by this. And they formed a committee. And they were more effective than any committee I have ever served on in my life, for they very quickly found the culprit. They didn't waste a lot of time like other things. They found a culprit, indeed, a young medical student by the name of John Page. And he couldn't really deny it, for he was found with a box of decaying body parts. So he confessed, "Oh yeah, I dug her up shortly after she was buried, but solely for the purpose of practicing dissection." So was he guilty? Oh yeah. But his punishment to me seems more a reward, for he was not sent to prison. Instead, he was sent to Fort Scott, Kansas to serve as an assistant surgeon. I only hope that his desire to save Civil War soldiers exceeded his desire to create new dissection opportunities. But we'll never know. You don't have any more information, right, Ryan?
No, his story kind of just
Fades
away. But his brother did have a extensive campaign to try to exonerate him.
Unsuccessfully. Yeah.
Pretty much.
We're going to talk about the town of Wanda. Actually, the town of Wanda was the first cemetery in Batavia. Along the banks near Lion Street, actually on the west side of the town of Wanda. It was actually deeded as cemetery in 1820. 3 years later, when Batavia became a village, officials purchased property and deeded property over on the east side, which is now the Batavia Cemetery. Now, you would think that having a cemetery in the middle or in the city near dry ground would make more sense to move bodies. Although I know burying along waterways is very spiritual, it's kind of foolhardy when we get flooded. But it seems like bodies didn't get moved, even with the creation of the new cemetery. For 1903, when workers were putting in South Lyon Street, basically to connect Main to South Main, almost immediately when they started digging, they unearthed a body of an unidentifiable man. And they keep digging, and they find another body. This one had a small coin purse on it that was Spanish coins. And so they were finally able to deduce that these were soldiers from the War of 1812. It seems that in particular they were soldiers from New Jersey who came up to fight in the war. They were going to pass through Batavia on their way to Niagara Falls, Lewiston, and Buffalo. But typhoid fever hit this area. A number of them died. It was winter, the bodies could not go back, and so they were buried along the town line. By the time they finished that project, they had dug up at least 5 or 6 bodies of these soldiers. And what did they do with them? They reburied them right along the creek edge. Yeah, there's a nice sign now to tell you that. But the next year, after this project was completed in 1904, officials were looking around the creek and saying, you know, we should move the bodies, divide up the land. It's great for residential and commercial development. Well, anybody who is driven by the creek knows there's commercial and residential activity, but the moving the body parts, I think they forgot. For the paper reported back in 1957, that when they were putting in a gas tank for a local business, they almost immediately dug up a skull and a few bones. And by the end of their digging project, they had their own skeleton completed. When CBS went in, I did hold my breath a few times, but nothing was reported as being found. So, who knows? But what I always tell people is admire the banks of the Tonawanda, but don't go digging. What you find most likely won't be treasure. So no shovels out there. Believe it or not, I want to take you next to Cole Muffler. Right next door. Right next door. Right now, it's a wonderful muffler shop, but at one time, that was the site of public hangings for Genesee County. And it's the site where the first man convicted of murder in the county was hanged not once but twice. And it's all dealt with a tree. That's why I have a tree picture there. It seems James McLean said, it's my tree and I want it to continue living. And his neighbor William Orr said, it's on my land and I'm cutting it down. Well, I believe Orr cut the tree down. And then McLean got very angry. A dispute followed and McLean took the axe and struck Orr a couple times and killed him. Now there's a third man involved in the scuffle, a man by the name of McLaughlin. And maybe he was trying to mediate, he was unsuccessful, he ended up being dead. We don't know who killed him, whether it was McLean or Orr in the argument. But when it was all said and done, the tree was down, so were 2 men, and just one remaining standing with a bloody axe. And he decided, I'm running away. And he did, but not for long. He was found a few days later in a tavern in Canandaigua, brought back to Genesee County by the militia. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. And the date was August 28, 1807. Now, if you lived in Batavia at the time, you would think, oh, great, a public hanging, our very own, I don't have to go out of town. And you had packed a picnic lunch, and you certainly would have brought the children, because what a great visual moral lesson on behaving, right? Doing the right thing. So once your picnic was done and it was time for the hanging, McLean was brought out, and he was led to the gibbet, or gibbet, depending on who you're talking to. And rather than a scaffold where the body drops through a trap door, with this device, weights are attached to one end of the rope, so the body is actually pulled up. And so McLean had the noose put around his neck, the weights were dropped, the rope broke, he drops to the ground. He's a little shaken, he's very alive. And once he gathered his wits about him, he said, please don't hang me again. Well, I think one of you had a great picnic lunch. You brought dessert, it was delicious. So you said to everybody, let him go. Because everybody's arguing what should be done. You said, let him go. He was hanging. A few seconds. Let him go. But maybe you had a bad lunch. Maybe the egg salad had turned. You forgot dessert. The kids were unruly. And you said, hang him again. And, you know, he wasn't convicted of 2 murders. He was convicted for 1 murder. Nobody knows who killed McLaughlin. But guess who the sheriff sided with? The bad lunch crowd. Yep. The sheriff sent the county clerk for a stronger rope, and when McLean was hanged a second time, it was successful. 7 men were hanged on that site between 1807 and 1881. Now, some people say the spirits stayed where the gibbet originally was. Others say that who wants to hang out with Muffler Shop for eternity? I'm going to follow the gibbet to the Holland Land Office, which is where it resides now. So my final story is actually about the very building we're in, the Holland Land Office, which some say is haunted by Joseph Ellicott, and maybe the 7 guys from next door. Now, the Holland Land building, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, is the oldest building in the county, built in 1815 to replace a log structure.
It's up there.
Okay. We'll give it credit.
Yeah.
We'll give it credit. And it housed basically the land office, because the Holland Land Company purchased most of western New York in 1797 from the Senecas. Now, Joseph Ellicott started as a surveyor for the company, but then became a land agent here. He was housed here. This is not where he lived. This was his office. He had a really nice house in town. And so he held a lot of power and a lot of sway, as did the company. And by all accounts, he wasn't a particularly pleasant man to do business with. I think he really let that whole power thing go to his head. And so it wasn't liked by everybody. Over a 20-year course, both the company and Ellicott started to really fall under some public criticism and scrutiny. So by the time he retired at 60, he was really a broken man, emotionally, mentally, physically. And his mental health continued to deteriorate to such an extent his family felt they really had no course of action but to have him institutionalized. And so he was sent to what would have been called an insane asylum at the time. And it was there in 1826 he decided that he would end his life by hanging himself in his closet. So if you believe in spirits and you believe them staying on this earth and going places where they would be happiest, I can't imagine he would want to hover in an asylum. More likely he would come back to a building where he had a great deal of power and influence. And I'd like to hope he's not alone. And that not just Ryan and Tyler keep him company, but the 7 men from Cole Muffler come over and spend some time with him. So I thank you for your attention. And those are our stories from the
Wish
West
we had
Side.
more action in Batavia like that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.